Good afternoon. My name is Glenda Saunders. I'm 78 years old and I was born in 1947 in a small town deep in Minas Gerais that doesn't even appear on maps anymore. If you're watching this video, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's not easy for me to share this story, but I believe it's important so others know there's always hope even in the darkest moments. Before I continue, please like this video and subscribe to support this important work. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing that my stories reach people from so many different places. My childhood started like that of many girls born in that era. We were 6 siblings, 4 boys and 2 girls, living in a simple house with a dirt floor on land my father claimed as ours, although I never saw any papers to prove it. What we had was a life of hard work, with little room for play or joy, at least not for me. From a very young age, I learned there was a big difference in how the boys and girls in the family were treated. My brothers could run freely across the property, swim in the river, and only come home after sunset. My older sister Lucy and I had to work from dawn to dusk, washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning, and tending to the garden. Woe to us if anything wasn't done the way Mom wanted. But it wasn't Mom who punished us. It was Joseph, my oldest brother, who took it upon himself to be the man of the house whenever Dad wasn't around, and my father, often absent, working on neighboring farms or spending days in town, made it clear he approved of this. That's right, boy. A girl must learn to serve from a young age, or she grows up rebellious and nobody will want her, he would say with a proud smile whenever he saw Joseph disciplining us. My earliest memories are of crouching on the kitchen floor, scrubbing the wood stove with steel wool until my fingers were raw. Joseph would stand there holding that leather belt ready to strike if I stopped before finishing the task. "Scrub properly, you lazy one," he would order, while Mom pretended not to notice, absorbed in the embroidery she was making to sell at the market. I remember a particular day. I must have been about 10 years old. I was washing the dishes after lunch when one slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. It wasn't just any plate, it was one of the few porcelain ones we had, a wedding gift from my grandmother to my mother. Joseph was in the living room and came running in at the sound. When he saw what had happened, he shut the kitchen door and took off his belt. "Do you have any idea how much that plate cost, you useless girl? Do you know how hard Dad has to work to buy another one?" he shouted while I curled up in the corner. I tried to explain it was an accident, that my hands were wet with water and soap, but he didn't want to hear it. The blows came one after another, on my legs, my arms, my back. I bit my lips to keep from screaming, knowing that would only make him angrier. Mom heard everything from the bedroom, where she was lying down with a headache. She didn't do anything to protect me. Later, when Joseph went out to meet his friends, she came to me with a cloth soaked in cold water and some homemade herbal ointment. "It was just a plate, my daughter," she said softly as she wiped the marks on my skin. "But your brother is right. You need to be more careful." I looked at her arms marked just like mine and asked, "Why do you let Dad do this to you, Mom?" She looked away as she always did when the subject came up. "That's just how things are, Gilda. A woman is born to suffer. You better learn that soon." That was the lesson I was taught every day, that I mattered less, my pain didn't count, and my work would never be enough. Joseph made sure to remind me of this constantly, especially when his friends came over. He called me ugly. He said I would never find a husband, that no one would even want me as a maid because I was so clumsy. "See this girl here?" he would say to his friends, pulling my hair to show me off like a rag doll. "She's so dumb she can't even learn to make coffee right. Good thing she's my sister." If she were my daughter, I would have kicked her out of the house already. My dad laughed at these jokes. He said that was exactly how you raised a proper woman, that Joseph would be a great father in the future. My mother kept her eyes down, stirring the food on her plate without eating, her body tense, as if she expected his anger to turn toward her at any moment. And it often did. One night, I woke to shouting coming from my parents' room. Dad had come home drunk from town and was accusing Mom of paying too much attention to the cookware salesman who had passed by our street that afternoon. I heard slaps, muffled crying, interrupted pleas. Joseph was awake too, standing in the doorway of the room where we, the children, slept, watching. When he noticed I was looking, he smiled in a way that sent chills down my spine. "See that, Gildinha? That's what happens to a woman who doesn't know how to behave. Dad is teaching Mom how to be a good wife." The next day, Mom showed up with a black eye and a split lip. She said she had tripped and fallen in the dark. Nobody questioned it, not even the neighbors, who must have heard the screams at the time, given where we lived. What happened inside the house stayed inside the house. I grew certain that this couldn't be the life God had planned for me, that somewhere there had to be a world where girls like me didn't have to fear their own homes, where brothers didn't become tormentors, and fathers didn't teach violence as if it were love. But to reach that world, I had to survive first. And that's what I tried to do day after day, year after year, in the shadows of a childhood that taught me just one thing, that for people like me, love always came with pain. At 11 years old, I found what would become my only refuge from that world of pain. The small public school, nearly 5 km from our home. I remember it like it was yesterday. The first time I stepped into that classroom, filled with the smell of chalk and wood. It felt like entering a completely different universe where for a few hours I could simply be Gilda, not the troubled girl or Joseph's sister. Teacher Mrs. Martha had kind eyes, unlike any gaze I knew at home. On the first day of class, she saw me sitting at the back of the room with long sleeves on. Even though it was February and hot outside, she slowly walked over and placed her hand on my shoulder. I didn't flinch out of instinct like I usually did with everyone else, and that surprised me as much as it probably surprised her. "Do you like stories, Gilda?" she asked softly, her voice so quiet it seemed she couldn't shout even if she wanted to. I nodded, too shy to say a word. "Then I think you're really going to love our library." Calling that small shelf a library was a stretch. It held maybe 50 books, but to me it was a priceless treasure. That very day, I came home with a thin little book of tales tucked under my arm. Mrs. Martha said I could take it home to read, as long as I returned it the following week. I hid the book inside my clothes so Joseph wouldn't see. He hated when I read anything besides my homework. "Reading fills a girl's head with nonsense," he'd say, repeating my father's words. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I lit a tiny candle I'd saved and read the entire book, hidden beneath the blanket, careful that the light wouldn't reveal my small act of rebellion. The stories were about distant places, about people living lives I could barely imagine. It was as if a window opened in my mind, showing me there was a vast world beyond the fences of our home. School quickly became my refuge. I woke up before dawn to finish all my chores on time so I wouldn't be late. I fetched water, swept the yard, and helped Mom with breakfast, all in record time. Then I walked those 5 kilometers alone, often barefoot to save my only pair of shoes, keeping them tucked away in my bag until I neared the school. Joseph mocked my dedication. "Why study so much? A woman only needs to know how to cook and obey." Strangely, Mom didn't agree with him on that. She herself could barely sign her own name, and maybe because of that, in her quiet way, she supported my studies. One night while washing dishes together, she whispered, "Keep studying, girl. It's your only chance to have a life different from mine." It was around that time I started to realize not every family was like ours. At the homes of my few school friends, parents talked to their daughters instead of just giving orders. Brothers might tease, but there wasn't that constant fear, that tension hanging in the air that seemed never to leave our house. I started to realize that what was happening to us wasn't normal, it wasn't fair, and most importantly, it wasn't my fault. Mrs. Martha noticed my interest in books and began lending me more, some even from her personal collection. "You have a gift, Gilda," she told me one day when I stayed after class to help her organize the notebooks. "Your essay about the river was the best I've ever read from a student your age." That was the first time in my life someone praised me for something I had done. I felt a strange warmth in my chest that I later understood was pride. But school also brought problems. Joseph didn't like that I came home full of ideas, as he put it. One afternoon, he caught me reading instead of taking the clothes off the line before the rain. He snatched the book from my hands and threw it into the nearest puddle. Now you're going to have to pay for it, you fool. He grabbed me by my hair while I tried to rescue the soaked book. How are you going to explain this to the teacher now? Are you going to say that Joseph's favorite little sister is irresponsible? I cried all night wondering how I would face Mrs. Martha. The book was ruined and I didn't have a penny to buy another one. The next morning I went to school with my stomach in knots from fear. When I finally gathered the courage to show the damage, expecting to be scolded or even expelled, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Martha looked at the book, then at the bruises on my arm I'd tried to hide, and her eyes filled with tears. Instead of punishing me, she hugged me. It was a hug unlike any I had ever received. It wasn't the quick, awkward hug from my mom, nor the fake hug Joseph gave in front of guests to pretend we were a normal family. It was a genuine hug that silently said I mattered. Don't worry about the book, Gilda. Books can be replaced. You can't. It was at that moment that something shifted inside me. A tiny seed of resistance began to grow. I realized there could be a different future for me, that the life I was living wasn't the only one possible. I started studying even harder, hiding my notebooks and books in places Joseph wouldn't think to look, under a loose floorboard, inside the lining of an old coat hanging at the back of the closet, even buried in a clay pot in the yard. At 13 years old, when many girls my age were already being prepared for marriage, Mrs. Martha called me in for a conversation that would change my life. She had noticed how hard I worked at school and believed I should continue my education beyond primary school. There's a school quite reputable that trains teachers, she explained to me. They offer some scholarships. I would need to live there, but they teach everything necessary to become a teacher, just like Mrs. Martha. The possibility of leaving that house, of having a profession, of being like Mrs. Martha was a dream too big to fit inside my small heart. But there was a huge obstacle, convincing my father and Joseph to let me go. Mom was my silent ally in this battle. Let the girl try, Anthony, she said to Dad in a rare show of courage. It won't cost us anything, and if she doesn't do well, she can come back home. To my surprise, Joseph was the one who resisted the most. If that girl goes to the city, she'll never come back. Who will take care of the house when Mom can't anymore? Who will serve the food when friends come over? At that moment, I realized that what bothered my brother wasn't losing my help around the house, but losing the control he had over me. The discussion went on for weeks. Dad was undecided. On one hand, he'd be proud to say he had a daughter who was a teacher. On the other, he agreed with Joseph that an overly educated woman causes problems. What ultimately settled the issue was the financial side. The idea of no longer having to support me and maybe even receiving some money from me in the future ended up convincing him. At 14, I packed my small bundle of clothes and set off for the big city with a recommendation letter from Mrs. Martha in my pocket and my heart torn between fear of the unknown and hope for a new life. Mom hugged me tightly at the train station like never before. "Go, my daughter, and don't look back," she whispered in my ear. "Do what I never had the courage to do." That skinny, scared girl who boarded the train that March morning in 1961 had no idea what awaited her. She only knew that for the first time in her life she was making a decision for herself. And despite all the fear, that feeling of freedom was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I arrived in the big city with wide eyes, like a newborn calf. I had never seen so many buildings, so many people, so many cars. Everything felt big, noisy, and overwhelming for a girl from the countryside. At the train station, I stood still, clutching my bundle of clothes under my arm, unsure of where to go. Then a lady from the school's welcoming committee found me. Mrs. Celeste, a woman with gray hair and glasses perched on the tip of her nose, would be my supervisor at the boarding school. "Gilda Oliveira, we've been expecting you. Come on, the school car is waiting." I got into the shiny black car, feeling like I was dreaming. In my mind, I thought that Joseph would never believe me if I told him I had actually ridden in a real car. The girls' boarding school was an impressive 3-story building with tall windows and a well-kept garden. I was taken to a dormitory where 5 other girls were already settled in. My bed was by the window and had a small trunk at the foot for storing my belongings, which fit easily with plenty of room. There were so few of them. My bunkmate, Teresa, was the daughter of merchants from Belo Horizonte and seemed to know everything about life in the city. On the first night, while I was unwrapping my only party dress all wrinkled from the trip, she looked at me with a mix of curiosity and pity. "Where are you from, Gilda?" "From Ribeirão das Almas," I replied for the first time, feeling ashamed of my origins. "I've never heard of it. Is it very small? So small it doesn't even show up on maps?" Teresa smiled innocently. "Well, now you're here, and once you graduate, you can go anywhere you want." The idea that I could choose my own path was so new that I could hardly grasp it. For 16 years, my life had been decided by others. Now, suddenly, the future felt like an open road. The first months were tough. I was years behind in some subjects compared to the other girls. My strong country accent drew giggles in class. My simple patch clothes stood out against my peers' neatly pressed uniforms. More than once I cried quietly in the bathroom, thinking I had made a mistake, that I didn't belong there. But there was a voice inside me, stubborn like the voice of someone who had faced the worst, insisting better to suffer here than to go back home. Then I would wipe away my tears, open my books, and study until my eyes burned. The school principal, Mrs. Augusta, was a strict but fair woman. One day, after reviewing my first semester grades, she called me into her office. "Miss Oliveira, I'm impressed with your progress. Despite the challenges you faced at the start, your grades are among the best in the class." "Thank you, Mom," I said, keeping my eyes lowered, as I had been taught at home. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, girl." I lifted my eyes, expecting to see anger, but instead saw only a steady determination in her gaze. "You're going to be an excellent teacher someday, but for that, you need to learn to value yourself. No one respects someone who doesn't respect themselves." Those words stayed with me. I began working not just on my schoolwork, but also on myself. I watched how the other girls carried themselves, how they spoke, how they dressed, not to imitate them, but to understand that there were other ways to be a woman beyond what I had known at home. To help cover expenses, I got a part-time job as a library assistant at school. It was paradise for me to be surrounded by books, able to read during my free time, and learn how to organize and catalog them. The librarian, Mrs. Leonor, became my mentor and friend. She introduced me to literature that would change my life. Books by Clarice Lispector, Cecilia Meireles, Rachel de Queiroz. "Look, Gilda, these are women writing about women," she explained. "Not how men see us, but how we really are." In 1964, when I was 17, I received my first letter from home since I left. It was from my mother, written in shaky handwriting and full of mistakes, probably dictated to a literate neighbor. It said that my father had died of a heart attack while working in the fields. Joseph had taken over the property and demanded that I return to help with household chores. I spent sleepless nights, torn between my duty to my family and my dream of graduating. Mrs. Augusta, noticing my distress, called me in again. "Does your mother have any other children to help her?" "Yes, there are 6 of us." "And are you the only one studying for a profession?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then your duty is to finish your studies. That's the best way to help your family in the future." I wrote back to Joseph with a respectful but firm letter saying I would visit home, but only after I graduated. I never got a reply. That same year, I met Charles, an engineering student who often came to the public library where I worked on Saturdays. He was unlike any guy I had ever met, polite, kind, and truly interested in my thoughts. When we talked about books and ideas, I never felt small or silenced. Our friendship grew slowly, nurtured by 2 people who had their own dreams and didn't want to walk over each other's. Charles respected my determination to graduate, and I admired his passion for building bridges and roads that connected people. By 1965, at 18, I was already a completely different person from the scared girl who had come to the city. I had friends, participated in the school newspaper, and tutored neighborhood kids. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a burden or a problem. I was someone with self-worth, someone who could make a difference. It was during this time that I got the news. Mom was very sick, pneumonia, the letter from the local doctor said. Joseph added a few blaming lines. If you had been here taking care of her like you should have, maybe she wouldn't have gotten worse. This time I didn't hesitate. I took a leave from school and went back to Ribeirão das Almas. The train felt like it was carrying me back through my own life. Every kilometer pulled me back to who I had been, not who I had become. The house felt smaller than I remembered, darker, more suffocating. Joseph was on the porch when I got there with the same stern eyes, now framed by an older, more worn face. He didn't hug me, just nodded. Finally remembered you have family? I swallowed the bitter retort rising in my throat. I hadn't come back to argue, but to see Mom. I found her in the same bed where I was born, as thin as a twig, her sunken eyes glowing with fever. When she saw me, a weak smile brightened her tired face. "My teacher daughter," she whispered, reaching out to touch my cheek. "You made it." I spent 2 weeks caring for her, using the basic nursing skills I'd learned at school. At night, I read to her from the books I'd brought, stories of strong women facing the world with courage. I don't know if she understood it all, but her eyes sparkled with every word. Joseph didn't make things easy. He criticized every decision I made about Mom's care, questioning my studies in the city as if they meant nothing. He was relentless in reminding me that I had abandoned the family. One night, after finally getting Mom to sleep and leaving her room, he was waiting for me in the kitchen. On the table was a half-empty bottle of cachaça, and he wore that look I knew all too well from my childhood. "So now you think you're better than us, huh? With your books and your little boyfriend from the city?" I didn't respond, trying to slip past him to get to my makeshift room in the living room. He grabbed my arm tightly, just like he had years ago. "When you were little, I could teach you respect. Seems you've forgotten everything I taught you." That's when I realized I was no longer afraid of him. Those years away had given me not only an education, but also strength. I pulled my arm away firmly and looked him straight in the eye, something I would never have done before. "No, Joseph, I've only learned things you could never teach me." I left the kitchen with the door open and went to bed. The next morning he barely spoke to me, but for the first time that didn't bother me. The power he held over me existed only as long as I allowed it. After 2 weeks, Mom was feeling better out of danger. The night before I left, she held my hand as we spoke alone. "I'm proud of you, my daughter, of who you've become. Come with me to the city, Mom. I can take care of you there." She smiled sadly. "My place is here, Gilda. It always has been, but yours isn't. It never was." I returned to school with a lighter heart, despite the difficult farewell. In the following months, we exchanged letters regularly, the first real correspondence between us. In them, Mom told me about life in the countryside, and I shared about my studies, Charles, and plans for the future. In December 1966, at 19 years old, I received my teaching diploma. On graduation day, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces, knowing I probably wouldn't find any, but I was wrong. In the last row, wearing her best dress and a borrowed hat, was Mom. Next to her, smiling shyly, was Charles, the man I had mentioned in my letters but never officially introduced. Somehow, they had met at the station and came together. That moment when I walked onto the stage to receive my diploma was not just a personal achievement. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for the women in my family. A chapter where education, not suffering, would be our legacy. In January 1967, with my teaching diploma in hand, I faced the hardest decision of my life up to that point. Charles had proposed to me that same day I graduated, on a park bench near the school, without a ring, no kneeling, just the sincere words of a man who respected my dreams as much as his own. "Can we build a life together in São Paulo?" he asked. "I got a job at a big construction company. You can teach there." The future he painted with his words seemed like a dream too good to be true. A home of our own, children who would grow up without fear, a life of companionship and mutual respect, everything I had never had and always longed for. But something inside me resisted taking that path, no matter how tempting it was. During the weeks I spent caring for Mom, an idea began to take root in my mind, a greater purpose that went beyond my own happiness. "I need to go back to Ribeirão das Almas first," I explained to Charles. "There are children there who will never have the chance I had. I need to be for them what Mrs. Martha was for me. Charles didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just held my hands and promised to wait as long as it took. A year, 5, 10, it doesn't matter. Some people are worth any wait. With his blessing and the promise of weekly letters, I returned to my hometown, no longer the scared girl who had run away in search of education, but as teacher Gilda, determined to make a difference. The school where I had studied as a child had lost Mrs. Martha, who had retired and moved to her daughter's home in the capital. The mayor, surprised by my voluntary return, didn't hesitate to offer me the position. Finally, someone with real education at that little school, he remarked, as if he were doing me a huge favor. I accepted the job for minimum wage with a personal mission that went far beyond teaching the alphabet and the 4 basic operations. I wanted to open windows in those children's minds, showing them there was a world beyond the fences of the farms, beyond the roles their parents and grandparents had played for generations. But before I officially started my role as a teacher, I had an important visit to make. I walked along the dirt road to our old property, feeling every stone and bend in the path like familiar friends. The house looked much the same, perhaps a bit more worn around the edges, carrying that tired air old buildings tend to have. Joseph was fixing a fence when he noticed me. His expression became stern, as it always did around me, but this time there was something different, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even reluctant respect. "Are you back to stay or just passing through?" he asked sharply. "I came to teach at the school," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "And I came to see Mom," he pointed toward the house. "She's inside, she'll be glad to see you." Mom was in the kitchen preparing lunch. When she saw me at the door, her eyes lit up like 2 stars. The hug we shared was long, full of unspoken words. "Where are you living?" she asked afterward. "I rented a small room behind Joachim's store. It's small but clean." "You could stay here," she suggested hopefully. I gently shook my head. "I can't, Mom. I need my own space now." She understood without me saying more. She was too young when she got married. She never had a place that was truly hers. I didn't want that for myself. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work with a dedication that even surprised me. The school was in poor shape. Broken desks, outdated books, a roof that leaked when it poured. But to me, it was a stage where I could play the most important role of my life. Soon, I noticed many of the girls were often absent from class. When I asked about it, I always heard the same reasons. I had to help at home. My father said studying isn't for girls, and I need to look after my younger siblings. I started visiting the families of those students after school, speaking with the parents and explaining the value of education. Many received me with suspicion, some with open hostility. "Are you from the big city telling us how to raise our daughters?" a farmer asked, with the same irritated look Joseph had when he was about to lose his patience. "No, sir," I replied calmly. "I come as someone who grew up just like your daughters and knows how much education can change a life." Little by little, family by family, I began to break down the barriers. When the girls started improving in their classes, bringing home notebooks filled with praise and high grades, even the toughest parents began to soften. In July of that year, I noticed something worrying. One of my brightest students, Lucy, 12 years old, began coming to school with dark circles under her eyes and bruises on her arms. I recognized the signs immediately. They were the same ones I had at her age. After class, I asked her to stay a little longer. "Lucy, is everything okay at home?" She looked down, just as I used to. "Is everything all right, teacher? If someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I will help." Silent tears started streaming down her face. "It's my older brother. Since Dad died, he says he's the man of the house now." My heart froze. It was like hearing my own story told again, a vicious cycle repeating in another generation. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself and to all the Lucys in the world. This cycle would end with me. The next day, I went to her house. Her brother Augustus, a 19-year-old with hard eyes like Joseph's, greeted me at the door with a hostile look. "What does the teacher want here?" "To talk about your sister's future," I replied. with a calmness I didn't quite feel. "Lucy is one of my best students. She has the potential for a scholarship in the big city, just like I did." He laughed scornfully. "Why? To come back all high and mighty like you? Women don't need that much education." Instead of backing down, like I would have years ago, I stepped forward. "Let me be very clear, Augustus. I know exactly what's going on in this house, and I won't let it continue." His face turned pale and then flushed with anger. "You have nothing to do with my family. I have everything to do with my students and their well-being. If Lucy's bruises don't disappear, I'll have a very serious conversation with the sheriff the next time he comes to town." It was a bit of a bluff. The sheriff rarely came to Ribeirão das Almas, and when he did, it was more to drink at the square's bar than to deliver justice. But Augustus didn't know that. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering a different path," I replied. "You can be the kind of man your father was, or you can be better. The choice is yours." I left there trembling inside, but with my head held high. I didn't know if my words would make any difference, but I was certain of one thing. I would no longer stay silent in the face of abuse, nor would I let another generation of girls grow up thinking violence is a normal part of life. In the weeks that followed, I watched Lucy closely. The marks on her arms faded, and slowly she began to smile again and join in class activities. One day, her mother came to the school, a small woman who looked older than her years, very much like my own mother. "I don't know what you told my son," she said quietly, "but something has changed. He's different now. Sometimes all we need is someone to show us that there is another way," I answered, thinking of Mrs. Martha, Mrs. Augusta, and all the women who helped me find my own path. Lucy's case was just the beginning. Soon more girls started coming to me, sharing similar stories. Some involved brothers, others fathers or uncles. The pattern was always the same. Men who believed they had control over the bodies and lives of the women in their families, and women who accepted this treatment because they didn't know any other option. In October 1967, I used my own salary to buy books on women's rights and start a small library at school. I organized evening meetings for mothers and daughters where we read together and discussed what it meant to be a woman in a world designed by and for men. At first, only 3 or 4 women came sitting quietly in the corners of the classroom. Over time, the group grew. Women who could barely read came to listen, share their stories, and find the strength they lacked on their own in the community. Joseph found out about these meetings. Of course, in a small town like ours, secrets don't stay hidden for long. One night, he showed up at the school door, drunk and furious. "So this is what you came back to do? Fill women's heads with nonsense? Turn wives against their husbands?" I faced him without fear, knowing the women were watching behind me. "No, Joseph, I came to teach that no one deserves to live in fear in their own home. Not even you. You've always been the problem in that house." He spat out the words, forever convinced he was better than everyone else. "I'm not better," I corrected him. "Just deserving of respect, like any other human being." He raised his hand, the same familiar gesture that had haunted my childhood. For a moment, I saw the scared boy behind the violent man, a boy who had also been a victim of our father and who had never learned any other way to be a man. "You can hit me here in front of all these witnesses," I said calmly. "Or you can go home and think about what kind of man you really want to be." To my surprise, and perhaps to his as well, his hand slowly lowered. Without saying another word, he turned his back and stumbled off into the night. That confrontation changed something fundamental between us. We didn't become friends or even allies, but a reluctant respect was established. Joseph stopped trying to intimidate me. Sometimes when I visited Mom, he even asked about school and the girls who had received scholarships to study in the city. In March 1968, I received a letter from Charles saying he had been transferred to a city just 2 hours from Ribeirão das Almas. "I can't wait any longer," he wrote. "If you can't bring your girls here, I'll come to you." We got married in a simple ceremony at the town church. Mom cried tears of joy. Joseph attended, sober and uncomfortable in his only suit, more present than before. Charles bought a motorcycle to travel between his job and our little house on weekends. Our life wasn't conventional by the standards of the time. a rural teacher married to a city engineer, each with their own job and mission, but it worked for us. Charles understood that my fight in Ribeirão das Almas was bigger than just the two of us. In December of that year, I organized the first official graduation ceremony for the school with printed certificates I ordered from the big city. For many of those children, it would be the only diploma they would ever receive. I made sure the ceremony was special with speeches, music, and a small reception. At the end of the event, a line of mothers formed to talk to me. One of them, Mrs. Josephine, held my hands in hers, calloused from hard work. Before the others arrived, she said, her voice trembling, "I thought the only thing I could leave my daughter was teaching her to endure life without complaining too much. Now I know I can leave something better behind, the certainty that she deserves more than just to endure." It was at that moment I fully grasped the power of education, not just to change a single life like mine, but to transform entire generations. Every girl who learned to read and write, who found her own voice and worth, would carry that knowledge with her, knowledge to pass on to her daughters and granddaughters. The true revenge against the abuse I suffered wasn't in punishing Joseph or any other man. It was in breaking the cycle, in creating a world where other girls wouldn't have to endure what I did. A world where being a woman wouldn't automatically mean being a victim. Over the years, my quiet revolution in Ribeirão das Almas gained strength and shape. In the 1970s, when Brazil was under military rule, our work at the school became even more important as a space of resistance and hope. Charles and I finally managed to buy a small, simple house near the school where we made our permanent home. In 1972, our first daughter was born, Helen. Carrying her inside me for months was a healing experience I never thought possible. Every movement, every heartbeat was a constant reminder that life was moving forward, that the cycle of pain could be broken. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I made a silent promise: "You will never know the fear I knew." Charles was a completely different father from the one I had known, kind, involved, full of love to give. Watching him rock Helen softly singing lullabies often brought me to tears, sometimes from joy for a daughter who had the father I never had, and sometimes from a late sadness for the girl I used to be. In 1974, we had our second child, Anthony. I chose that name not to honor my father, but to reclaim a name tied to so many painful memories. This Anthony would grow up to be a different man, raised with love and respect, taught from a young age that true strength has nothing to do with domination. The school thrived under my care. Little by little, I secured more funding from the city, new books, even a small expansion that allowed us to build a proper library. But my greatest pride was the students who kept moving forward, especially the girls who, like me, found in education a path to freedom. Lucy, the first student I helped break free from the cycle of abuse, was also the first to receive a scholarship to study at the same teacher training college where I graduated. When she returned years later as a qualified teacher, I hired her immediately to work alongside me. Gradually, the school was becoming a place of strong women, building a future for other women. Mom moved in with us in 1975. When her health began to decline, Joseph had married and fully taken over the property, and she said she preferred to spend her last years with the daughter who understood what truly matters in life. Having her with us was a gift. My children were able to know their grandmother, who, despite the limitations of her time, had done everything she could to help me escape. On warm afternoons, we would sit on the porch and she would tell stories from her own childhood to the kids, stories she had never shared with me before. I learned that she too had been abused by her father and brothers, that her marriage had been arranged against her will, and that she had dreamed of becoming a midwife before she became just Anthony's wife. "If I had had a teacher like you, Gilda," she told me one day, "who knows, my life might have been different." "You did the best you could with what you had, Mom," I replied, holding her wrinkled hands in mine, and that was enough to give me a chance. In 1979, we faced our first major crisis. The new mayor, a close friend of Joseph's, decided that the school needed a more traditional approach. I was called to the town hall for a meeting where they made the problem clear. My classes were filling women's heads with dangerous ideas. "What ideas might those be?" I asked calmly. That they deserve respect, that they can dream of a life beyond being wives and mothers, that their bodies belong to them and no one else? Well, teacher Gilda, the mayor replied with a condescending smile, you know that these modern ideas only bring confusion to our peaceful community. We already have young women refusing to marry, wives questioning their husbands. I sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the confirmation that our work was indeed sparking change. Mr. Mayor, I finally replied, you can remove me from the school's leadership, but you'll have to explain that to the more than 50 mothers who have already signed a petition for me to stay, to the students who have improved so much on the state tests, and to the capital's newspaper that is preparing a report on our work here. It was a bluff again. There was no report being prepared, but I had learned over the years that men like him feared public exposure more than anything else. The threat of dismissal never came to fruition. On the contrary, in the following years, I received news that our school had been selected as a model for a state rural education program. The modernizations that scared some so much were, in fact, putting Ribeirão das Almas on the map for the first time. In 1982, something happened that I never thought possible. Joseph fell gravely ill with lung cancer that spread rapidly. When I found out, my first instinct was one of indifference. He made his bed, I thought. Now, let him lie in it. But Mom, with her simple wisdom, made me see things differently. Forgiveness isn't for him, daughter. It's for yourself. I went to visit him in the hospital in the neighboring city where he was admitted. I found a man very different from the one who tormented my childhood, thin, frail, with sunken eyes from illness. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Shame, regret, I couldn't tell for sure. I didn't think you'd come, he said in a hoarse voice. Neither did I replied honestly. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of decades of hurt hanging between us. You know, he started hesitantly. When you were little and I did those things, I thought I was teaching you to be strong. That's what Dad said an older brother should do. That wasn't strength, Joseph. It was cruelty. He closed his eyes for a moment. I realize that now. Watching my own daughters grow up, I see how wrong I was. It wasn't a formal apology, but coming from Joseph, it was as close as we would get. I took a deep breath, letting decades of bottled-up anger slowly begin to fade. Are your daughters doing well? I asked, realizing I hardly knew my nieces. A faint smile appeared on his tired face. The oldest, Teresa, is in college in Belo Horizonte. She's going to be a lawyer. The irony didn't escape me. The man who once tried to stop my education now took pride in his college-going daughter. Maybe in some twisted way, my struggle had even benefited his family. Joseph passed away 2 weeks later. At the funeral, his daughters came to hug me, calling me Aunt Gilda, the teacher. I realized that even without direct contact, my presence had meant something to them. Perhaps I had become an example of how a woman could be more than what the men in her family allowed. The 1980s brought many changes to Brazil and to our small community. Political opening the first direct elections, a new constitution that finally recognized women as full citizens. In Ribeirão das Almas, these changes arrived slowly, but they did come. In 1985, we opened the region's first women's center, a space connected to the school where we offered vocational courses, basic legal assistance, and support groups for victims of domestic violence. What started as my informal reading meetings had transformed into a recognized institution that even gained support from international NGOs. Charles, always my biggest supporter, used his connections in the construction company to secure donated materials. Together, we built a simple yet dignified building with bright, airy rooms, very different from the dark basement where those first meetings began. At the inauguration, looking at the dozens of women present, of all ages, from girls still in school to elderly ladies who could barely sign their names, I understood the magnitude of what we had achieved. It wasn't just a building or a program. It was a quiet revolution that changed an entire community. Mom didn't live to see this accomplishment. She passed away peacefully in 1983, sitting in her rocking chair on our porch, watching the children play in the yard. Her last words to me were, "You broke the chain, my daughter. That was all I ever wanted and could never do." Helen, my eldest, followed my path in education, becoming a teacher and later earning a degree in pedagogy, something I never had the chance to do. Anthony chose engineering like his father but specialized in rural schools. Seeing him forge his own path, free from the burden of the past I carried, was the greatest reward I could have hoped for. In 1991, at the age of 44, I received the greatest recognition of my career, the National Prize for Rural Education. The ceremony took place in Brasilia, and for the first time in my life, I flew on a plane. Charles, Helen, and Anthony were with me, cheering as I stepped onto the stage to receive the plaque. In my acceptance speech, I spoke not about myself, but about all the Gildas Marys and Lucys who came before and after me, about how education is not just a right, but a tool for liberation, especially for women who have been made to believe they have no right to dream. Every time a girl learns to read, I said into the microphone, my voice thick with emotion, an entire universe of possibilities opens up. Every time a woman realizes she deserves respect, an entire generation is transformed. Today, at 78, I look back and see the full arc of my life, from the terrified girl who trembled at the sound of my brother's footsteps in the hallway, to the nationally recognized educator, from the child who hid books under the mattress, to the woman who built a community library, from someone who thought she deserved abuse, to the grandmother of 5 grandchildren who are growing up knowing they are unconditionally loved. If you had asked me when I was 10 years old whether I would ever forgive those who hurt me, I would have said no, that I would never forget or forgive. And in a way, I haven't forgotten. The scars are still there, invisible to others, but always present to me. But I learned that the best revenge is not to return violence or hold on to hatred. It's to break the cycle. It's to build something new and beautiful on the ruins of what they tried to do to you. It's to transform your own suffering into fuel, to change the world, even if it's just the small world around you. My story isn't unique. In every city, in every rural community in this country, there are women carrying similar burdens, fighting their own silent battles. If my life can serve as an example to any of them, if it gives courage to a single girl to say, "No, I deserve more than this," then every tear I've shed will have been worth it. Because in the end, what matters is not how much we suffer, but what we do with that suffering. Whether we use it to close ourselves off or to open up, to perpetuate pain or to heal it, to accept the world as it is or to transform it into the world it should be. And if you're watching me now, carrying your own scars, know this: you are not alone. Your pain is real, but it is not your final destiny. As I discovered in that small classroom so long ago, there is always a path to the light, even on the darkest nights. This is the most important lesson I can give you. True overcoming doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from transforming it into a better future, not just for ourselves, but for all those who will come after us. My dear ones, if you enjoyed my video, don't forget to like it, comment if you know someone who has been through something similar, and subscribe. Until next time, M.